No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. This is Outspoken Live episode number 122. Click and subscribe to our brand new independent news source. And I have to tell you, there was a very special moment after the show last night at the HQ of my amazing producer's launch pod. Because look at this. It was the exact moment that we hit 250,000 subscribers. That is the best possible Christmas present for me. Thank you so much for all of your support. We only launched in July, so it's a pretty incredible moment. But if you are watching this video and you are not subscribed, hit that button now. It's completely free. Turn on the notification bell and spread the word about Outspoken. Today is actually the last uncancelled after show of 2024, but we will be here with new episodes as normal at 5 p.m. UK time, midday Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Very special week next week. The Lady Colin Campbell Awards on Monday. Ben Habib counting down the top 10 Union Jackasses of 2024 on Tuesday. And then on Christmas Day, Father Calvin Robinson. So don't go anywhere. Breaking right now, finally a charge in the Manchester airport police attack, but only after a major campaign on this show and by Reform UK. So why did it take nearly 6 months to ignore the grifter lawyers and back the completely innocent cops? I'll analyse in my digest next. Then my superstar panel weigh in. Today, a return for the fellow at the New Culture Institute and the senior editor of the European Conservative, Harrison Pitt, and making her Outspoken debut, the Heartland Institute UK and Europe Executive Director, Lois Perry. Can't wait to speak to them both. Also coming up on the show today, Farage has Labour spooked after another mega win overnight. J.K. Rowling declares she's the new Winston Churchill as her row with India Willoughby erupts on social media. And the GB News bloodbath sparks a civil war. I'll reveal the hypocrisy of Mark Dolan. Then, in the Uncancelled After Show, Angela Levin has a major royal exclusive on why Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are furious with Prince William and Catherine, the cheek of that, plus a very serious update on the King's cancer battle. And the Uncancelled After Show, you know, it's now broadcast exclusively daily and on demand on my Substack for the final time this year. So this is time for me to plug Substack. It's a free speech platform. Please enter your email address, hit subscribe. You can do so completely for free. If you do want to support the show, though, financially, you can subscribe to a monthly paid membership for access to the After Show live or on demand, Monday to Friday. And as I say, the Uncancelled After Show returns in 2025. But now, let's go. Britain's two-tier justice system is creaking and cumbersome. weighed down by woke priorities, political pressure, manipulation by human rights lawyers, and campaigns on social media. And nothing sums that up more than the despicable case of the quite clearly unprovoked attack on armed police officers at Manchester Airport. But in July, just days after Slippery Starmer became Prime Minister, all those suspects tried to create Britain's George Floyd moment, with the release of a highly edited, totally misleading video on X suggesting that two, quote, innocent men had been the victim of police brutality. Of course, days later, footage emerged thanks to a leak to a journalist showing no such thing. But the problem is that by that point, the authorities had overreacted. They were stuck in a rut. No one seemed to give a damn about the female police officer who had her nose broken in this confrontation. Or by the way, what about the fact that these are armed officers? So this type of confrontation can really put the public at threat. Today, far too late, common sense prevailed, with Mohammed Ahmaz, 20, charged with 2 offences of causing actual bodily harm, 1 charge of assaulting an emergency worker, and 1 charge of common assault. Meanwhile, Mohammed Ahmad, 25, is charged with causing actual bodily harm. But the big news, the significant news, is that no police officers will be charged. Hallelujah. Sly News obviously wasn't delighted having to break that piece of news.
Breaking news. It relates to an incident at Manchester Airport in the summer, 23rd of July 2024. You might remember a high-profile incident with police and arresting a number of individuals, and some of it was recorded on camera and some of it showed some force used. Well, 2 men have been charged with offences after an incident at that Manchester Airport, 23rd of July. The CPS has charged them with assault on police officers. Their name's Mohammed Ahmaz, 20, with 2 offences of causing actual bodily harm, 1 charge of assaulting an emergency worker, and 1 charge of common assault. And Mohammed Ahmad, 25, is charged with causing actual bodily harm. No police officers will be charged. This is just coming across right now. And of course, the headline there, 2 individuals charged with assaulting police officers, but no police officers have been charged. And the 2 defendants will appear at Liverpool Magistrates Court on Thursday, the 16th of January.
Any analysis from the mainstream media, though, about the insanity that it has taken this long, given the alleged attack was captured on CCTV, and given that those involved in the so-called riots after the Southport massacre have already been locked up with the key thrown away in many cases? Now, you've got to remember the grift that was involved in their case. Do you remember when their ridiculous first lawyer, Ahmed Yaqub, claimed that one of his clients had been the victim of an assassination attempt?
The family are okay, but they are traumatized. Mohammed Fahir, his medical condition has worsened since last night. A CT scan has revealed there is a cyst on his brain. So please pray for his well-being. Right now, the main concern for us, for me, is that the family receive justice and this no longer happens again.
Then the MSM lapped up this press conference with their new lawyer trying to present them as victims. Now, of course, I'm not for a single second suggesting there's any guilt here, because, of course, I believe in due process. But I will say that once again, it was left to Reform UK to do the real work of opposition and make this happen. Watch.
The Southport riots led to immediate arrests and, in some cases, imprisonment, not just for those that threw bricks, but for those who said things online. Yet, the appalling attack on police officers at Manchester Airport has been completely ignored. We think, as Reform UK, this is as clearer illustration of two-tier policing, two-tier justice in two tiers Britain as you could possibly see. And we promised a few weeks ago that if the Crown Prosecution Service did not lay some charges against these men who, remember, even broke the nose of a women's police officer, that we would take out a private prosecution. And Richard Tice, my deputy leader, has news.
So let's remind ourselves, this assault took place on the 23rd of July. Here we are in the second half of November, no news whatsoever. And
as former Reform spinner Gwaine Towler put it today, at long last, there is no conceivable reason why this has taken so long. Reform UK and Richard Tice seem to have succeeded in chivvying their CPS along without threatened private prosecution. But the way this case was managed is further proof of the two-tier justice that has infected every aspect of Britain's judicial system. As one of our best legal minds, Stephen Barrett, put it today, no one will forget how long this took. But now, the uncancelled interview. And I am delighted to welcome back to Outspoken today Harrison Pitt, who is a fellow at the New Culture Forum, host of the brilliant show Deprogrammed, and senior editor at the European Conservative. And joining Outspoken for the first time, Lois Perry, the UK and Europe Executive Director of the Heartland Institute. And I know we'll speak about Nigel a bit later in the show, Lois, but he was the star guest alongside yourself and Liz Truss at the launch of the Heartland Institute this week. Congratulations. It's so important that this is coming to the UK. Harrison was there too. Actually, so many great Outspoken people were there. Anne Widdecombe, Lady Colin Campbell, Liz Truss, Connor Thomason. Honestly, it was such a good event, Lois. So congratulations. You're back because, of course, you were UKIP leader very briefly, weren't you?
Yes, I had a brief leadership of briefly the leader of UKIP, and then I had some time out and some time off because I'd been extremely unwell with pneumonia, and I was told to take 3 months off. And in actual fact, I took 2 days off because I was elected the leader of UKIP 2 days after coming out of hospital. So, you know, I actually listened to the doctors, had 3 months off, and now I'm back. I'm very, very privileged to be heading up the Heartland in the UK and Europe. And thank you so much for coming to my party.
His Majid Nawaz. No, it was a brilliant, brilliant night. And I'm going to show a little bit of what Nigel Farage had to say later on. But Harrison Pitt, can we kick off with this breaking news? The Manchester airport attackers finally charged. But this should never have taken so long, should it, Harrison? And it does just show how our justice system not only is a two-tier justice system now, but is so influenced by political pressure, social media pressure, and actually woke ideology. Because I will never forget that they wanted the public to believe that this was the UK version of George Floyd, and it was nothing of the sort.
It's also, thank you for having me again, Dan. It's fascinating when the justice system goes into overdrive and when it decides to drag its heels. In the aftermath of the Southport riots, of course, many of them were riots, many of them were just peaceful protests. Much of what happened there, as we've discussed before, Dan, was just people engaging in sort of nasty rage rhetoric online that, as far as I'm concerned, the law shouldn't have taken an interest in at all, that these were not plausible threats of incitement in many cases, and yet lots of people have landed themselves in jail, not just for violence, but for tweets. The entire justice system in the aftermath of that went in to overdrive, because in that case, the justice system being infected, as you say, with woke ideology, because according to the dictates of woke ideology, the host population of Britain, the white British population that was righteously infuriated by what had happened in Southport, gets classed as a certified oppressor. And as a result, the justice system goes into overdrive in order to punish people who express opinions that are verboten according to woke ideology. Whereas on the other hand, in this case, of course, we have in the case of these two men who are now going to be charged. And you're quite right to say that we shouldn't prejudge the case, but suffice it to say there was plenty of probable cause that was widely available online. This wasn't exactly a complex evidence gathering mission. There should have been prosecutions coming forward instantaneously, but because in this case we're talking about what, according to the dictates of woke ideology, gets classified as an accredited victim group, because this is a minority community, a sort of tribal interest group living in this country, the police are absolutely petrified, particularly in the aftermath of the Macpherson report in 1998, since which they've been actively trying to pursue social justice, so-called, in order to brandish their sort of anti-racist credentials. They were terrified of, igniting those sorts of combustible sensitivities that we often see happen when we have these poorly assimilated tribal interest groups living in our towns and cities. For these tribal interest groups themselves, that they regard the impartial application of the law as an interference in their own internal affairs, because they think of themselves in many cases as a kind of nation within a nation, and to be dealt with by authorities like the police through community leaders drawn from their own race, drawn from their own ethnicity, drawn from their own religion. And because our sort of cowed police force, and because our cowed CPS, and because our cowed justice system as a whole in the aftermath of the Macpherson report is petrified of ticking those people off and potentially leading to loss of community cohesion, they drag their heels in those cases. So yeah, you're quite right. It's a textbook case of two-tier justice in this country, and very illustrative of the ideology that drives that anarcho-tyrannous dynamic.
Totally, because Lois Perry, the thing that worries me so much is what if the Manchester Evening News had never publicly revealed the full CCTV footage so we could all see with our own eyes what happened? What if that footage had never been released? I mean, the police were furious, and actually seemed more furious that Manchester Evening News had got that footage rather than actually worrying about what had happened. And in some cases, Lois, footage won't exist. And this is my real fear. There is a rush to judgment now. We absolutely believe in guilty before proven innocent. And people should always remember, if you see a video on social media, if you hear a claim on social media, quite often you're only getting one side of the story. And in this case, that is now proven to be true, given not necessarily that these two men are guilty, but given the police officers have not been charged. So that means the CPS believes they did not do something where there is a serious chance that they could be prosecuted in a court of law.
Well, you're absolutely right, but it seems that it's only guilty until proven innocent when it's to people who are, against or pro the woke, against the woke ideology.
True.
It's all just one-sided. But I just and you're absolutely right. If this footage didn't exist, we would never have known the truth. So how many truths that we've been told in the past are just complete fabrications, but we have no evidence to contradict that. But I'd just like to make a point about how the Americans see us based on all these jailing people for tweets and social media stuff. I mean, when I was talking to the Heartland USA, and we were talking about setting up Heartland UK and Europe over here, one of the only reservations that they had actually was that I personally, or that they could end up in court for tweets or for social media posts. I mean, one of their top lawyers, one of their top directors said, could I end up in prison because you don't have the same rights in the UK to freedom of speech as we have in the States? They were really, really concerned. They thought that if I questioned net zero on, for example, your show or GB News or anything like that, that not only could I be thrown into prison, but that they would be financially and legally liable in the US as well. So the damage that has been done to our reputation on the other side of the pond, I didn't realize how enormous it was, Dan, until I was speaking to the Heartland USA about their concerns.
Yeah, totally. And what do you make, Lois, of the role that Reform UK has played in actually getting this, getting the CPS to, I would argue, do their job?
Well, Reform, I don't think, takes much stretch to the imagination. You know what I'm going to say. Reform are the heroes, aren't they? They're the good guys in all of this. They're the common sense heroes. They're the people that are representing the not so silent majority of people in this country. And you know, you saw how well they did at the last general election. I believe that they will win the next general election and that Nigel Farage will become prime minister. But it seems that Reform are the only people actually doing the correct things. And people believe in them on the left and the right. They're picking up, you know, as you spoke about earlier, as many Labour voters, disgruntled Labour voters, as Tories. That, you know, they seem to represent everyone. And you know, thank God that we've got them.
I know. Thank God we've got them indeed. Well, on a similar note, breaking right now, another massive Reform UK win overnight. Look at this. Richard Tice says another great win for Reform UK. Massive swing away from Labour. Tories slipping away. And the figures are quite extraordinary. Let me just look closely at this from the Election Maps UK. So this is in the Milton Regis Swale Council by-election. The Labour councillors stood down over safety issues. And there's Labour down 33%. And who enters on 33.9% from a standing start? Reform UK. The Conservatives there at 12.3%. And what is particularly fascinating for me is that the Reform UK movement, and specifically Nigel Farage, is already influencing government policy. And this is very positive if you're a Brexit supporter like me. So revealed by Politico in the past few hours is the fact that the Brexit minister, this is Nick Thomas-Symonds, has directly admitted to members of the European Parliament that the reason why his government's proposed reset with the EU appears relatively timid is because of Nigel Farage. So let me just tell you exactly what this article said. According to one EU official present at the recent talks, Thomas Symonds told the MEPs he'd love to do more, but that Nigel Farage's upstart Europhobic reform outfit had come second to Labour in 89 constituencies at the election, making a closer embrace of the EU politically problematic. An official who was present at the talks, an EU official, told Politico he was apologetic. He said that he wanted to go further. And the official added, I don't understand being scared of your own shadow in the first 6 months of your 5-year term. So Harrison Pitt, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because you have the mainstream media and you have most of the political establishment in public trying to dismiss Nigel Farage and say things like, oh, Reform are irrelevant. They've got 5 seats. We're not worried. Behind the scenes, true terror. And even just having Nigel Farage in Parliament is potentially going to at least partly protect Brexit.
Yes, they oscillate, don't they, between calling outlets, populist outlets like Reform irrelevant, but then also talking about them obsessively. You can't have it both ways. You know, they wouldn't be occupying your mind if their activities in politics weren't becoming more and more salient. And I should say as well that I think the timing of this pickup that Reform has had, I've been, as you know, Dan, I've been critical of some softening of rhetoric and Reform in the last 6 months or so, but I understand that you know, they've got to be, they're playing a long game, and so I don't want to be sort of aggressively counter-signaling them. However, I do think it's perfect timing because it's exactly at this time that Starmer himself has, in my view, quite persuasively outflanked Kemi Badenoch, not least on immigration from the right. I mean, he has been talking about how the Conservatives, and this is all true, by the way, embarked on an open borders experiment, a global Britain experiment, like using rhetoric which 5 years ago would have had people like us accused of, you know, being, you know, one step removed from fascism or whatever else it might be. And he's quite persuasively doing that. And in a way, the Conservatives have given Starmer a real gift, precisely because net immigration is now currently running at about 900,000. All Starmer really needs to do is get it down to say 450,000. If he cuts it in half, that's still 450,000. That's still far too much for my liking, and yet he can present it as a great victory. So while Starmer is having success in his battle with the Conservatives, I think it's very, very good news that Reform seems to be clipping at Labour's heels in those traditionally quite Labour heartlands. And by the way, I should add, just to finish off, that I don't think that people who live if you look at where the riots were primarily concentrated, it was precisely in those sorts of, in the kind of the Red Wall, the Labour heartlands, not least towns like Rotherham and Rochdale, which have experienced the really nightmarish aspects of diversity in the form of the industrial rape gangs. I think that Starmer's clothed response to that whole affair, where he basically just wants to demonize everybody and not take their legitimate concerns seriously, I don't think they're ever going to forget that. And since they're not going to go to the Conservatives, Reform is the only credible alternative for those people. So it's no wonder that Reform are making those inroads, and will no doubt continue, not least with some of that Musk bucks, to continue making such inroads. So we'll see.
Yes. Lois Perry, where do you stand on those issues that Harrison spoke about at the top of his answer, though? The fact that a lot of people on the right, who are people who we love, people who we respect, a lot of the people who are at the Heartland Institute launch, are saying Reform is tacking too much towards the centre. Not enough talk about mass deportations, not enough talk about changing demography, and also that way that I guess Tommy Robinson and his supporters have been derided as that lot. Do you share any of those concerns, Lois?
Well, it was always my intention, and when I campaigned to be the leader of UKIP, and I never had it ever, that I wanted to unite both the parties under one umbrella, and Tommy Robinson, not necessarily his supporters, but Tommy Robinson personally, because of his criminal history and because of other things that are known and might not be publicized, but are known about him personally, he would never be able to be brought into a party that could actually be elected and actually form a government. There was no way that could happen. And one of the reasons that I resigned my leadership, as well as health issues, was that they were back channeling to Tommy personally and weren't taking any notice of me. So the actual what I campaigned on, the uniting the right, bringing the parties together, making an electable Reform Party merged with UKIP, would never be able to happen. It would never be able to happen. I do believe that saying that lot was clumsy, and I think there is a big distinction between Tommy Robinson personally and Tommy Robinson's supporters. So, but the thing is, Reform need to be electable, and they are being judged much more harshly than all the other political parties. If Nigel stood there and said mass deportations of anyone that is the wrong background or whatever, can you imagine? They would crucify him. They would go absolutely mad. But what he has said is that there should be deportations of anyone who comes into the country illegally, who then immediately breaks the law. But, the rhetoric has to be slightly more careful for Reform. Everyone's out to get them, Dan, everyone. And they need to be, they just have to be on the line.
So Harrison, how do you respond to that? Because UKIP have gone completely the other direction now. Lois's successor as leader, Nick Tanconi, who was on the show earlier this week, has made it very clear that he wants Tommy Robinson to stand as a candidate for UKIP. He thinks Tommy Robinson could end up in Parliament. So do you share concerns that Lois has about this splintering of the right, or do you think it's a mistake for Reform to be so, I guess, dismissive of wanting Tommy Robinson supporters? Because arguably you could say, how can you unite the right if you take that view of Robinson supporters as that lot?
Yes, you certainly shouldn't be talking about them in that fashion. I would respond by saying that reform is going to be crucified if it so much as dares to wake up in the morning and brush its teeth. I mean, the media is never ever going to give reform a fair shake, and so rather than treating the media as the proper implicitly treating the mainstream media as the legitimate arbiters of moral authority in Britain, particularly at a time when we're living through a digital revolution. I mean, your show represents this, Dan. The mainstream media, in many ways, has never been in such low water. And in the United States, we saw Trump precisely on that kind of platform talking explicitly about mass deportations, talking about leaving the UN Refugee Convention. He's now appointed Tom Homan, this sort of knuckle-headed Scots-Irish border czar, who's going to embark on the largest deportation in American history, even larger than the one that Eisenhower trialed in the 1950s. I do think that we're living through a time of immense political ferment. And as a result, people's loyalties, people's voting loyalties, people's political loyalties are never going to be more up for grabs than they are now. So rather than being too pedestrian, rather than being too timid, in my view, reform should be showing immense leadership on this and sort of, making the moral and political case for what needs to happen in Britain, and trusting that through sheer force of leadership, through sheer force of argument, through sheer force, not least of Trump, potentially doing exactly these sorts of things across the channel. In other words, it won't be a kind of utopian model. It will be a realistic, pragmatic model that we can point to, occurring concretely in a country that is very similar to ours, namely the United States. It's exactly that at this time, that reform should be showing ambition, should be radicalizing to some extent, or rather presenting what is the media calls radical as,
yes, because it's
not.
Common,
yes,
it's not because. Yes, come in, Lois.
Sorry, can I just cut in there? It is different. It is very, very different. I mean, I may have got this wrong, and if I have, then I apologize to Nick. But I'm pretty sure, Nick Tenconi, that I've seen him in public and in private call for deportations of Muslims that were even born in this country. I'm sorry, but Donald Trump has never, ever called for mass deportation of individuals based on their religion who were born in the USA, ever. It's a slightly different rhetoric here. And I would say you never win elections in this country unless you win over the Daily Mail. And the Daily Mail people and Middle England are not going to like this extremely Islamophobic rhetoric. See, I've always said I'm very, very anti-Islamism, but I'm not anti-Islam. And UKIP has really gone really, really far that way. And so I think it's perfectly acceptable to not, for me personally, to like Tommy Robinson as a person, but to not dislike his supporters, because I think, and I've said this before.
The problem is, though, Lois, the problem is, right, and this is where I'm with Harrison, the mainstream media are never going to accept Reform UK. The Daily Mail, and remember, I was a columnist for the Mail Online up until 2023. They were claiming that Reform UK was far right during the election campaign. So the Daily Mail are not an honest broker anymore. And I think things are changing so much that we no longer have to rely on the mainstream media trying to keep this two-party system going at any cost. Because actually, when we look at the Daily Mail saying we're far right for voting Reform UK, what do we think? I don't trust you anymore. I don't trust a word that you say anymore, because we are not far right for voting Reform
without
UK.
breaking any confidences. Can I just say, I think that positions are changing. I really do. I think that, certain people are seeing which way the wind is blowing, and they don't want to be on the wrong side of history. I can't say any more than that, but things are changing. And when I talk about the Daily Mail, I don't necessarily mean the Daily Mail as in the paper or the online thing. I mean the kind of people who have traditionally read the Mail. I don't think that, and I don't think that the reason why Reform is not embracing Tommy personally is because they're scared of the media. I think that they just don't want an association with him and certain elements. But as I say, it's perfectly acceptable to say that Tommy Robinson's supporters are good people and well-intentioned people with legitimate concerns, without being a fan of him as an individual. I don't
Because-
see why they have to be conflated.
Because all Tommy Robinson wants, by the way, is for Reform UK to stop attacking him. That's all that he wants. He doesn't actually want entry into the party or anything like that. He just wants the attacks to stop. But look, I think where Farage has been very strong, and this is where I wanted to show a little portion of what he said at the launch, Lois, of the Heartland Institute, is on the issue of nut zero. Because while Labour
Nut zero.
focuses... That's my line. I was going to catch on, Lois. I was going to catch on. but while
knew
Labour is focused on rolling back Brexit, what I love about Nigel is he's looking ahead. And he has seen the next Brexit, and the next Brexit, in his opinion, and my opinion too, is nut zero madness. Watch.
But those of us that thought differently about these things were condemned, mocked, derided. Whilst out of the country, a different conversation was happening. Believe me, net zero is the next Brexit. Net zero is the next big political issue. It is fundamentally going to change British policy.
And Harrison Pitt, that's what I love about Farage. And yes, we can be critical on certain aspects, but what I love is he's already thinking about the next big battle. And actually, I believe he's right on this. Ed Miliband is bankrupting us. The mainstream media are in cahoots. The Conservative Party are in cahoots. Let's start talking about that.
Yes, science has been weaponized to try and saddle us and burden us with presently the most expensive industrial energy costs in the world. The net zero agenda written into law by Theresa May in 2019 is heavily implicated in that act of economic self-harm. On the Brexit point, I think it's interesting that Farage used that phraseology, talking about it being the next Brexit. I should say that I want the immigration question to be the next Brexit more than I want net zero to be the next Brexit. But nevertheless, I think one of the things that you cannot take away from Farage, and I would never dream of taking it away from Farage, is his skills as a campaigner. And I think his real success with Brexit was linking what was hitherto considered quite an obscure niche constitutional issue, namely our membership of the European Union, which used to attract these very thoughtful people like Bill Cash and John Redwood. But what Farage did very effectively is he linked that quite stuffy argument, as it was in the 1990s, to mass immigration. He's really good at connecting these things to bread and butter concerns rather than them being too abstract, as they were if you were reading Bill Cash's speeches in the 90s, at which very few people were, God bless him. And I think what Farage is going to do with net zero, and what I think he'll be quite effective at doing with net zero, is relating it, because it is, as Lois knows, a quite technical question that requires think tanks like the Heartland Institute to go through the weeds. But I think what Farage is going to be very, very good at doing is relating it to those bread and butter concerns. And in this case, rather than the bread and butter concern being immigration, it will be the cost of living. So if Farage can effectively relate net zero in people's minds with the cost of living, I think he has a real chance of winning over people's loyalties. As I said, I think
Big time.
This is the time to be doing that. It's the time to be bold. It's the time to be fearless.
Big
Absolutely.
time. Amen to that. Breaking right now, J.K. Rowling has marked 5 years as a gender-critical campaigner by suggesting she will self-identify as Winston Churchill in a brutal dig at India Willoughby. So the Harry Potter author posted on X, and look at the geniuses at Grok who have perfectly actually presented J.K. Rowling as Winston Churchill. But she posted on X saying, "The thing is, India Willoughby, I really do enjoy cigars, whiskey, and facing down totalitarians. So by the same arguments that make you a woman, I am indeed Churchill." Now, this was quite a day for J.K. Rowling, because 5 years ago, her life changed. She went from being the toast of the liberal elite, beloved in Hollywood, invited to every A-list party going, to all of a sudden, persona non grata, being slagged off by the horrible little toads that she made famous, that she made rich, like Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, Rupert Grint, and even Eddie Redmayne. And it's fascinating when we look back 5 years ago to think what caused this mass hysteria. And this is what J.K. Rowling posted 5 years ago, which will go down in history as one of those public statements, I believe, that changed culture. So this was her tweet at the time. 5 years ago today, and my only regret is that I didn't speak out sooner. So this is what she posted setting up this week. To every girl and woman who's paid a heavy price for fighting to retain their rights and boundaries, to every person striving to halt an appalling medical experiment on minors, I salute you, we will win. But this was her original tweet, December 19th, 2019. Dress however you please. Call yourself whatever you like. Sleep with any consenting adult who'll have you. Live your best life in peace and scrutiny. But force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real? ? Hashtag I stand with Maya. Hashtag this is not a drill. Referring, of course, to Maya Forstater. Now, Benjamin Ryan, the writer, asked J.K. Rowling a simple question after she made this post. If you could rewrite that first post from 2019, what, if anything, would you say differently? And J.K. Rowling replied, nothing. It's all there. I love gender nonconformity. I always have and always will. At the same time, sex is real. Sex-based offending is real. And I'll always stand with the vulnerable against an elitist ideology that has caused untold damage. But I think it's fair to say, Harrison Pitt, that J.K. Rowling has certainly become braver in her rhetoric over the past 5 years, certainly become bolder. And what I love is that she uses her great intellect and her real wit to, for example, make the point that if India Willoughby is going to identify as a man, J.K. Rowling will identify as Winston Churchill. What do you make of it, Harrison?
Yes, I mean, this is the one of the many slam dunk arguments and trans ideology. If there really is this kind of Cartesian separation between mind and body, and our physical characteristics, our biological nature exists independently of our psychological convictions and our mental states, our mental life. If these are entirely independently separate entities, then if you can change gender, why on earth can you not change overall personality? If you know, it's called. This is the logical consequence of what some philosophers call expressive individualism, namely your identity is purely contingent upon whatever psychological convictions you might have. And trans ideology, of course, taps into that intuition that many modern people have. And if you have talented wordsmiths like J.K. Rowling pushing that logic to its absurd conclusions, then that's a good thing for our movement, I suppose.
And the thing is, Lois Perry, is that India Willoughby is just on a grift, right? Because she used to be totally reasonable about these issues and used to say, oh, no, we shouldn't be changing science. I just want to identify as a woman. But this has become a grift for her because arguably she has most fame or more fame than she's ever had in her entire existence because J.K. Rowling challenges her lunacy.
Absolutely. This defines her now. She probably uses this and her extreme arguments to define her more than what she sees as her, you know, her gender being wrong or whatever. But it's very, very interesting that I never, ever defined myself as a feminist in any way whatsoever. I've always jokingly said, and it's only half a joke, that if there is a patriarchy, it served me so well since I was about 12 years old that you know, the more the merrier. But I mean, you know, joking aside, things changed for me massively when they said that men could self-identify and go into little girl spaces, changing rooms, dressing rooms, things like that. That's when it got dangerous. And then it didn't just get dangerous, Then it got ludicrous. You had the guy in Scotland who was I think he was a rapist or domestic abuser, who literally put the worst wig I've ever seen on a human ever on, said he was a woman and got put into a woman's prison. And that, as you know, was what actually brought down Nicola Sturgeon personally. That
Adam
particular
Graham.
case.
Because she wouldn't call Adam Graham, the rapist, a man. I mean,
unbelievable. I mean, I've got a slightly different view to a lot of purists on this. I actually think that if somebody genuinely has gender dysmorphia, they are an adult, they've got jumped through all the hoops, they've had the operation, they've had 2 psychiatric assessments, they've done the whole shebang, kit and caboodle. There's so few of those, by the way, it's unbelievable. I personally, if they had would not have a problem with them going into my dressing room. I really, really wouldn't. But I know that a lot of women have very different views to that. But what I do have a problem with is the indoctrination of children, the medicalisation of children, and also a guy called Bob puts a wig on and can go and pervert my little girl in Primark changing rooms. That's what I have a problem with.
yeah, I agree. Or, well, let me put it this way, Lois. I used to agree.
Okay.
A few years ago, before this madness, I would have agreed with that argument. But I don't anymore, because I believe the argument has been hijacked. And it has been hijacked by extremists. It's been hijacked by rapists. It's been hijacked by abusers. And also, to be honest, it's been hijacked by the lowest of the low in the celebrity world, like Sam Smith, the guy who I used to know, who thinks that because he puts on a dress that we should now all call him they, and that they should get rid of the best female categories at the Brit Awards. That actually happened.
No, I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. But don't you feel sorry for that tiny minority, the kind of people that you and I, that you used to support before it was hijacked, that they have had this tiny minority of people who are genuine people, have had, as you say, militant groups, grifters, perverts, all sorts of people, celebrities who just want more attention, like Sam Smith, that they've ruined it for them. They've made it somehow horrible, whereas in the past people were much more live and let live. I don't know. Is that a shame?
Well, I understand what you're saying, but the thing is, right, all of a sudden it's gone from dressing however you want, because, by the way, Boy George was doing Sam Smith's stick back in the 1980s. He just didn't suggest.
In my bedroom, Dan.
Yeah, and he's great, but he didn't suggest that we call him she or they. He didn't suggest that they should get rid of female award categories. No. Sam Smith is a bloke. Now, if Sam Smith was going into your daughter's changing room with his penis out, in the same way that Leah Thomas was going into the changing room of the swimmer Riley Gaines with his penis out, I'm sorry. I think all parents should have a problem with that, Harrison Pitt. And does that mean that maybe some people now receive harsher treatment? Well, possibly, but unfortunately, that is where we're at.
Shame.
You're pushing at an open door with me there, Dan, saying that's going to warrant harsher treatment. All I will say to Lois, maybe by way, not so much rejecting her argument, but more qualifying it, is that I do feel immense sympathy with anyone who's struggling. If my my grandfather, no longer with us, had dementia, and he would often be in very sort of confused mental states. There was one time when, actually I won't go into that, but okay, put it this way: if you had a grandfather who was suffering with dementia and all of a sudden thought, well, it's on topic, let's say, thought he was Napoleon or thought he was Winston Churchill, you would feel sorry for that person. But feeling sorry for that person doesn't mean necessarily that you affirm those delusions. There's a difference between compassion, which will often require sturdy, stern treatment in the person's interest, and indulgence, which in my view is just neglect under another name.
Yeah, the other thing that's upset me a bit about this whole thing is that another thing that I love and have always loved is drag artists, drag clubs, and drag performances. And I feel that because of the militant stuff that's been going on, this very ancient form of performance, for drag means dressed as a girl. It's written on all of Shakespeare's scripts, dressed as a girl. That this kind of thing is being vilified and made to look perverted as well. Whereas most drag performers, they just, they're like, Widow Twanky or whatever in pantomimes. They just
I
perform
know,
for adults.
but this is the woke
actually.
eating themselves. This is the woke eating themselves. This
Yeah.
is what happens because now I don't watch, but apparently the drag race shows now have females, which is all quite weird too.
Yeah, well,
because-
my daughter, we don't watch it anymore. It's been ruined recently. We
Yeah,
don't,
exactly, because
it's all about drag.
it's gone woke. Lois, can I ask you though about these horrible little Harry Potter stars? Should they apologise to J.K. Rowling now? The likes of Emma Watson, Eddie Redmayne. I know he's the
nasty little
Fantastic Beast, Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint. They all turned on the woman who made them a multimillionaire, who made them a household name, just to appease the woke mob. Shouldn't they apologise to her now, Lois?
Absolutely, they should apologise to her. And it's a shame that they're so fear-ridden that they couldn't stand with her, or at least even listen to her arguments. I get the impression that they were advised, or just because they're just wokey that age anyway, that they just went, they didn't even listen to her arguments. They didn't even take on board her concerns. It was just immediate, you're a bigot, you're a bigot. It's a way of shutting somebody down, isn't it? You're homophobic, you're transphobic, you're a racist, you're a fascist. It's just a way of shutting people down. So yeah, 100% they should apologise to her. Horrible little tykes that they are.
Do you agree, Harrison?
I don't think people are duty bound to agree with people just because they have enabled them to have starry careers. And of course, it would be foolish to doubt that J.K. Rowling has enabled them to do that. But they didn't just disagree with her, and this is the key point. If they disagreed with her amicably in public, I think it would be rich to say that they have duties forever and ever to agree with her just because she made the Harry Potter series that made them famous. But they engage in something much nastier, which is a form of sort of reputation demolition, castigation, stigmatization, these sorts of things. And so, yes, I think they should apologize to her, although, of course, they are mainly disgracing not the person of J.K. Rowling, but the truth.
Very, very true. Very, very true. Okay, Lois, Perry, Harrison, Pitt, do stand by, because in just 1 minute, the latest on the civil war at GB News after the bloodbath that saw a whole load of presenters sacked just before Christmas. But first, you know how often I talk about the need for free speech to be protected. But I've been increasingly thinking of the need for personal protection from snoopers, bad actors, and hackers online. And I'm delighted to tell you I have found the fail-safe solution. But what's more, this VPN, or virtual private network, to use the full term, is also a life changer when it comes to providing you entertainment and information from anywhere in the world, wherever you are. So let me introduce you to Surfshark, an incredible and easy-to-use service that encrypts all your internet traffic, meaning your online activity stays safe so you can shop, stream, browse, and conduct your banking online in complete privacy. But the benefits of Surfshark go way beyond keeping you safe online. It allows you to access your favorite entertainment and news shows and channels, including, by the way, and this is where it gets really exciting, international streaming services like Hulu, iPlayer, HBO Max, Peacock, or geo-blocked versions of Netflix, Amazon Prime, or Disney+. So within seconds, you can be watching as if you're in another country. If you're traveling for work or on holiday over the Christmas period too, this is a way for you to get all your favorite content from home, including sports, by the way, because you know sports rights overseas can be a big issue to stop you watching. Surfshark is also an insurance policy against creeping censorship in many countries like France, which has now banned Rumble. So effectively, you can watch anything, anytime, anywhere with a click of a button. This is what I describe as true freedom. A VPN can save you money too, because if you shop for deals on websites that change their prices depending on where you're buying them from, you can just change which country you're in. I actually didn't know websites did that until I had Surfshark. There are other benefits too, because you can use Surfshark on unlimited devices, which means your entire household can stay safe with just one subscription. There are over 3,200 servers in over 100 countries, so in reality, a world of choice is at your fingertips with Surfshark. Also, I understand for a lot of you, this may be your first time using a VPN. Don't worry, Surfshark has 24/7 customer service. So go to surfshark.com/outspoken for an extra 4 months of Surfshark at an unbeatable price, or you can just click on the link in the description box below. What's more, Surfshark is so confident that they are the best VPN in the world that you can give it a try for a full 30 days. And if you're not entirely satisfied, you will get your money back. So surfshark.com/outspoken for an extra 4 months of Surfshark at an unbeatable price. Just click on the link in the description box below. But now, back to the show. Breaking right now, a civil war at GB News after a Christmas bloodbath that saw Mark Dolan and Isabel Webster sacked and Jacob Rees-Mogg's hours and presumably salary slashed in half. Now, Dolan has been lambasted in his bid to present himself as a victim of cancel culture, given the way he slammed Lawrence Fox and attempted to steal my former show within hours of our suspension from the former Free Speech channel because of a joke, remember, which I think that overreaction forever destroyed their free speech reputation. But look, last night I made it clear I didn't want to dance on Dolan's grave, so I thought I gave a very fair and measured response. But today on X, he decided to go to war, writing, "Breaking, Dan Wootton has launched an extraordinary attack on me, describing me as GB News' management's bitch. I'll be responding on YouTube." So I just want to remind Mark exactly how he became the bitch of GB News management, who have now brutally sacked him before Christmas, which, by the way, is just awful. So this was the moment when most viewers lost the respect of Mr. Dolan.
But unless you've been living under a rock or don't have internet access, you'll be aware that GB News presenter Lawrence Fox appeared on the channel last night and made some offensive comments about the journalist Ava Evans. Free speech is everything, but it comes with responsibility. Anything you say or write or broadcast will rightly be exposed to the court of public opinion. I know, I've been there, and I'll be there again. Whether Lawrence should stay on air is not my decision, and Dan's absence tonight is also beyond my control. There is an investigation ongoing, but the comments made by Lawrence, in my view, were sexist, misogynistic, and unusually, in the frenzied climate of the so-called culture wars, have been condemned across the political spectrum, from left and right, and even the Liberal Democrats, wherever they are. GB News has directly apologised to the journalist concerned.
But the hypocrisy was off the scale there, given Dolan himself never even stopped his personal attacks. So remember, I lost my job for smirking at a saucy joke after the watershed, but here he was on Victoria Beckham.
She's a second-rate singer who opened her legs to anyone who wants it, and no damehood Clive, very, very harsh words there, and I'm certain that that's not true of Victoria Beckham, who's very happily married and has been for a long time. Victoria is not a national treasure with you.
As Charlie Sansom wrote at the time, the double standards never cease at GB News. Mark Dolan sent out a very explicit email from a viewer provided to him by producers to then immediately apologise afterwards because the viewer suggested something rather negative about Victoria Beckham. I thought Dan Wootton and Lawrence Fox set an editorial precedent about criticisms of women on air. Or perhaps that only applies to presenters the management no longer value. While I certainly do not wish for Dolan to lose his job, I do wonder why he berated the duo last September to effectively do the same thing a la Ava Santina last night. Make up your own minds. And then it got worse, because who could forget Mark Dolan's disgraceful bullying of Catherine, the Princess of Wales, when folk like me were warning very clearly, publicly, to the world. I mean, I remember I appeared on Meghan Kelly's show in the States to say, be careful with what you're saying about Catherine, because I know she is very unwell. This was the coverage that Dolan provided on GB News.
And some are even suggesting that Princess Catherine has an Adam's apple, but I seriously doubt that she is the first trans royal. But if the palace have nothing to hide, they should publish the original photograph, which we're told was taken by William. But I doubt they ever will, which is why this story will now enter conspiratorial folklore forevermore. In the end, there is a lesson for the royal family and for all public figures. Be straight with us. You take a photograph of the family on Mother's Day and you publish it. The very fact that this image has been doctored in any way, even for aesthetic reasons, is a problem for a monarchy that wants to be seen as authentic, real, credible, and down to earth. Meanwhile, the questions where is Kate and what's going on with her health will only get louder.
Well, where was she? She was trying to tell her young children that she had been diagnosed with cancer and was about to undergo chemotherapy. And as I say, I never wanted Mark Dolan cancelled for that, but I do think the hypocrisy is off the scale. I do think, though, that perhaps the biggest issue for Mark and so many presenters on GB News is that they don't actually really have their own principles and views, and they will simply do what they are told. As I said yesterday, Mark Dolan became management's bitch, and then management threw him under the bus. Dutifully read the auto cue. That's what he did. Not talk about the Southport Massacre cover-up, or Tommy Robinson, or Katie Hopkins, or anyone else who was deemed banned by management. But the problem for Mark is that his true feelings have been revealed over the past couple of days because the comedian Jonathan Norris tracked down his old tweet. I've checked, it's still available. It was posted by Mark Dolan before the Brexit referendum, where he said, like everyone, I'm a little torn on the referendum, but it's quite clear all the freaks and nutters are for Brexit. Hashtag Farage, hashtag Bojo, hashtag IDS, hashtag Gove. So let me bring in my superstar panel now, Harrison, Pitt and Lois Perry. And look, this is a difficult one, Harrison, because I had absolutely no desire to turn this into some sort of war of words. I'm just stating what I see to be the truth about the situation. But at the end of the day, this is the risk, isn't it? If you are part of a big corporation where you can be chucked under the bus at any moment and you effectively give up your principles and your morals for them. And that was never something I was prepared to do. I was never prepared to do just what I was told to do in my ear. And at the end of the day, I hope that while I did sometimes make mistakes, my viewers understand that at least you saw the real me.
This is, naturally, I'm on your side, Dan. This is one of the problems with trying to walk a fine tightrope on when you are going to lend credibility to the woke moral universe by drawing from it and criticizing others, perhaps for status, perhaps in order to deflect criticism from yourself. There are all sorts of reasons why people who aren't technically woke sometimes lend credibility to that way of thinking for personal reasons. But once you do that, of course, you land yourself in a position where you can be condemned and where you can be attacked and when you can be ditched for precisely the same reasons. So as far as I'm concerned, this underlines the need for two things. One, for us not to treat our opponents as the legitimate arbiters of moral authority in Britain. Once you've done that, once you sacrifice the language to them, once you sacrifice the moral precepts to them, once you sacrifice everything else to them, they have the upper hand on you, and you're engaging in battle on their terms. And it also underlines the need for outlets like yours, Dan Wootton, Outspoken, outlets like the New Culture Forum, outlets like Lotus Eaters, which can truly value free speech without Ofcom breathing down their neck. So that's what I would say in response to this debacle.
Absolutely. And the thing is, Lois, look, of course, I wish Mark Dolan the best. I actually was the person who perhaps a bit of a folly of mine, but I actually brought him into GB News to begin with. But look, I was just reflecting how the viewers feel about what happened and why I think this new independent world is so critical, Lois, because I can tell you, hand on heart, no one tells me what to say here at all. No one tells me what to say. No one's in my ear telling me not to say that. No one's saying, oh, I have to have a particular political point of view, or I can't talk about this, I can't talk about that. There's no billionaires who are pulling the strings. I believe that's the future of the media. And I just would say to people who are at GB News still, do what you really believe, because it's not worth selling your soul for a corporation that is going to be prepared to throw you under the bus. I mean, I put my life into launching GB News. It actually came at serious cost to my physical and mental health. Not that I'm going all woke on this, but, I cared passionately about making it a success. And then one mistake, or what they considered one mistake, out the door. Brutal. But I learned a big lesson from that. Actually, I don't want to be owned by anyone. I only want to be accountable to my audience. And that is what I love now. I'm only owned by my entire audience. And I find it a beautiful thing.
Well, I mean, I completely get what you're saying. I had a situation at Talk TV where I was told that if I mentioned net zero at all, I wouldn't be allowed to keep my show that I was doing with Andre Walker. That was the woke that was. So we were in a weird situation where he was allowed to mention net zero, and in fact he could have a number of guests on the same shows as me that mentioned net zero, but because Ofcom had specifically mentioned me as a dangerous person, I was sitting there on my topic, unable to mention net zero, and I had to weigh it up. I had to weigh up whether me having a profile generally, which I could then use to bounce onto the other channels to promote what I was doing, talking about net zero madness, nut zero, or not. And in the end,
what
they
did you
threw
do?
me under a bus. Yeah, I sold out. Yeah, and then they dumped me anyway. So I wish I'd been as brave as you. I really do. But
well, look, we all have our moments. I mean, look, I'm not some Mr. Perfect, right? What happened with the Lawrence Fox situation is that I refused to apologize while the show was on air because I didn't like throwing my guests under the bus for their opinions. I'd always made it so clear to the channel, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be little Mr. Oh, you naughty boy. Naughty Lawrence, or be devil's advocate for the sake of it. It was an adult show after the 9 p.m. watershed. I thought we were all grown-ups to deal with it. But I did do, and I remember speaking to Meghan Kelly about it at the time, and she described it, Dan, it's your hostage video apology. And she did the same thing when NBC were trying to force her outright over a blackface controversy. She did the same thing, did the apology. It wasn't even written by me. I didn't feel it. And I regret that. Of course, I regret that. But because at the end of the day, those apologies never save you. They've just got you. But I am proud that on air, when I was on air, I was always myself. I always presented my genuine views, and I never gave in to the censorship because there was a lot of censorship going on. Don't talk about this, don't talk about that. But as I say, I wish Mark Dolan the best of luck. I truly do. But I think everyone in the mainstream media needs to wake up to what is going on.
Well, I'm so happy. I'm so happy to be on your show. I really am, Dan. And I really value your support the other night at the launch of the Heartland UK Europe, at the Heartland Institute for the UK and Europe, because you mentioned Nigel Farage talking about net zero being the next Brexit. Well, I'm not going to blow my own trumpet, but actually I am going to blow my own trumpet. My organisation, Car 26, we were the ones that actually influenced Nigel's policy and reform policy to be the only anti-net zero party in Parliament. And he's acknowledged that as well. In fact, the first time I went on his show in GB News, he basically accused me of being a bit of a nut. I mean, I might be a bit of a nut, but a conspiracy theorist. And I had to sit there and defend. He said, well, why would they be doing it if it wasn't about saving the planet? I mean, obviously, he has to play devil's advocate. And I said, I don't believe this is anything to do with saving the planet, but everything to do with the deindustrialization of the West, globalization, and basically impoverishing us all for Marxist policies. And he sort of looked at me as if to say, well, okay, good for you that I'd said it. But then when one person stands up, then everybody else stands up. And he's been a big supporter of what I've been doing. And the fact that he's decided to work so closely now with what I'm doing with the Heartland UK and Europe and use net zero as his next Brexit is fantastic. But as I say, the first show I'm doing talking about this is yours, Dan.
Boom! I love it, and I'm so delighted to have you here. And Harrison, it is actually interesting, just finally, when we think about Farage and GB News, because they want him off, and I believe that Labour. I was actually told, Harrison, by a senior Labour source, even before they were elected, that the whole reason why they want to change the rules on MPs' second jobs is to get Farage off GB News. And we've seen a very similar thing this week, Harrison, in terms of changing the rules about political donations, simply in order to stop Elon Musk being able to donate to Reform UK. So it's the deep state in action. But I would argue actually the most powerful thing Nigel could do is become an independent media player now, because then he wouldn't be regulated by the off communists. And I think he would have an absolutely massive channel overnight.
Yes, it's definitely true that people who are Ofcom has yet to be formally, legally, and officially updated to try and catch all of us. And that is to say, all of the people who operate in the kind of digital online media sphere, rather than the typical, the more conventional broadcasting sphere. That's why you have more freedom here, Dan. That's why we have more freedom here at the more freedom at the New Culture Forum, and likewise Farage, if he were to join. If he were to set up, say, his own YouTube channel, well, he's already got a YouTube channel. He's already got a TikTok. But what I mean is, if he were to take his Farage show to YouTube in the same way that you have, Dan, that would be a victory. That would be a short-term victory, I suppose, and that it would get him off the hook with, as you call them, the off-communists. But it would only be a matter of time before they updated the rules again.
I know, and we live in fear. We live in fear about that. But look, what I would say, Harrison, is it's going to be much harder for them to regulate the internet. Don't get me wrong. They're trying, right? They are trying hard, but it's much easier for them to regulate a couple of actual linear stations in GB News and Talk TV than it is to come for the internet, where all of a sudden they'd be having to censor you or regulate you. They'd be having to regulate me, but they'd also be having to regulate all of the content that comes in from overseas. So Steve Bannon, Meghan Kelly, Tucker Carlson, it's an impossible job. So good luck if they want to try and do that. But you'd effectively be turning the UK into a censorship state. But look, don't get me wrong, they are going to try. But well, what an absolutely fabulous superstar panel for today. Thank you both so much. Of course, Harrison Pitt is senior editor at the European Conservative, a fellow at the New Culture Forum, host of the brilliant D Programme podcast, which I really recommend everyone watches. I've appeared on it before. It is a great show. He hosts alongside Connor Tomlinson. And Lois Perry is, of course, the UK and Europe head of the Heartland Institute. So great to have both of you. Merry Christmas, guys, and please come back in 2025.
Happy Christmas.
Bye-bye.
Now, coming up in the Uncancelled After Show today, Angela Levin has a major royal exclusive on why Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are furious with Prince William and Catherine. The cheek of that. But there's also a serious update on the health of King Charles as well. So a lot going on with Angela. You've got to come over to Substack, though. That's where we host the Uncancelled After Show, www.outspoken.live. That is our membership section. It's the last Uncancelled After Show of the year, but don't worry, we are returning in 2025. Seriously, though, please subscribe for free on the Substack. It's all I ask, www.outspoken.live. Then we get to build the direct connection. And I just have to thank you all once more, because yesterday, straight after the show, we hit the 250,000 mark. Look at that. This was the moment it happened in the studio of my brilliant producers, Launch Pod. There's the little party going on. And to do this so quickly is all down to you. If you are watching this, though, and you haven't subscribed, it means the world. It makes a big difference. Just hit subscribe, like, comment. We have such an engaged audience. Vote in my polls. So many ways to support Outspoken. But as I say, we have a big week planned. Even though there's no Uncancelled After Show, I'm still here live, 5 o'clock throughout the Christmas and New Year period. On Monday, Lady Colin Campbell is in the house. On Tuesday, Ben Habib will count down the biggest Union jackasses of 2024, and then a special Christmas edition with Father Calvin Robinson on Wednesday, where we will reveal your greatest Britons of 2024. So see you 5 p.m. UK time, Monday, midday Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Most importantly, I promise to keep fighting for you, and I hope to see you on Substack with Angela Levin for the after show in just one moment.